Maryanne. Welcome to another episode of the Influential Nonprofit. You may be not hearing yes as fast or as frequently as you want, and that can be a really frustrating place to be. So we're going to talk today about how we can hear um, yes faster, more frequently, with less follow-up by understanding and meeting the needs of our donors in the moment, the emotional needs of our donors. Let's picture this for a minute, right? You do everything right. Good meeting, clear mission, you show up well, you're prepared, or you send a really great appeal, the connection's good, it's all right, and yet still no yes. Or let me think about it, get back to you, or you're getting the runaround, you can't get somebody to call you back. Your follow-up is dragging on for months. And the issue isn't your ask, it isn't your words, it isn't your case. It's that the ask is happening at the wrong level of readiness, that your donor isn't ready to say yes, that in your need to have them say yes, you may not be paying attention to where they really are. And I get this, and I know you get this, and this shows up in a lot of aspects of our lives, just not fundraising. This is why, releasing the outcome is so important, because the more we're attached to an outcome, right, the less we can really hear and witness what's happening. But this shows up in our lives all the time. So by understanding the needs of our donors, we're able to meet their needs in the moment, which will ultimately lead us to a yes. So the framework for this conversation is something I have been working with. And if you are lucky enough to join me for my Uplevel Your Influence course, this is one of the things that we work with. And it's called the Map of Consciousness. And it is by a researcher and psychologist or psychiatrist, Dr. David R. Hawkins. He's written a ton of books, Power versus Force. Um, I can't think of the other one. Anyway, in these books, the Letting Go, that's the other book, Power versus Force, the Letting Go. There's a bunch more, but one of the foundational concepts that he introduces is this map of consciousness. It's originally been developed to understand human behavior, and not just understand it, but actually measure it, because our heart beats, right? And it sends out electrical frequency, right? We are sending out electrical current all the time, and they actually measure these currents, and to understand the energy that we're putting out. And yes, I know sometimes these things get a little, get poo-pooed out because we think about the tangible things, but energy is everything. And the energetic and the emotional needs drive everything. And the more we ignore energy and emotion, the harder this work will be. So what this does, it gives us a framework to understand how to better meet the needs of people. Because the more we meet their needs, the more likely they are to give us money or to participate in whatever way we want. This is not about spirituality or belief or wooey. This is a listening and relationship tool. And people move up and down the map of consciousness depending on stress, money, where they are in life. And so it's not like we sit at one level our whole lives, we move up and down them. And other thing I want to say is there's different stages of consciousness. One is not better than the other, but one could be more appropriate for a fundraising than another, right? So let me just walk you through this very basically. That the map of consciousness is helping us understand when people are ready for a yes, and then that framework, because every level has a different capacity for decision making, and some are better than others. But when we ask someone at the wrong stage, right, it's going to be a break in the relationship. We're going to lose rapport, we're going to lose momentum. So that map helps us understand where people are at and what kind of conversations to have. I also use this map when helping people serve their clients, to understand where people are at emotionally, why they may not be ready for change, why they may not be responding to certain programs or initiatives that you offer in a way that you want. And I use this as a model to say, hey, these people are not, they are, living in fear. They're not ready to embrace change. So let's walk through the map so you can understand it. And I will spend the bulk of this here. And I'm also going to give you some examples of how you can listen for cues, because this is all about your listening skills, right? In influence, which I help people master the art of influence. It's not what we say, it's what we hear from other people. We get all geeked up about saying the exact right thing, and we think that's going to unlock some secret portal to money. But really, it's how we are listening and responding to the needs of people. So I'm going to teach you what stage, I'm going to teach you what each stage is, and then how that they may respond to you so you can really listen and hear it. Okay. First and the lowest stage is shame, guilt, and fear. Now, let me tell you, this is like a big stage, but I have taken this and sort of condensed it down and simplified it so that we can use it easily. But the lowest level, the frequency, right? Our lowest vibe is guilt, shame, guilt, and fear. These levels are dominated by avoidance and self-protection, and our capacity for decision making is very limited because we are mired in guilt, shame, and fear. Now, again, there's no stage is better than the other. No one's needs to be labeled or diagnosed. This is just a tool to help us understand where people are at. And in those low vibe situations, people their view of the world is fearful, chaotic, difficult. And what this looks like in donors is they could be apologizing, they could be avoiding, they could like I wish I could kind of things. There may not be a yes available here, right? There just may not be. Your best response is communicating safety, reminding them that they have a choice and not asking at this time. What this tells me at this donor needs safety more than an invitation. Let's talk about what you'll hear. You'll hear, I wish I could help, but I can't right now. Things are tight. Silence or avoidance, you just don't hear anything. Apologies for not giving. But here's what's happening underneath that is there's financial or emotional stress, there's fear of making the wrong decision, and fear and of feeling inadequate or ashamed. Because if you have to say no, or it makes you feel bad, it makes you feel guilt and shame. That's why so many people say stuff like, send it over in writing and I'll take a look, because they want to avoid having to say no to you directly and feeling that guilt and shame. So, what you don't want to do when people are in this shame, guilt, fear area, which is push urgency, use guilt or moral pressure, right? Start over educating or over explaining or trying to make your case or ask for a larger commitment. Here's what you do want to do: normalize the reality, right? I'm really glad you told me there's no pressure here. Your care matters regardless of how or when we care about you regardless of how or when you give, right? We're going to normalize the reality, emphasize choice and dignity, and lower the emotional temperature. When someone is in this fear, shame, guilt state, your job is not to close the gift, it's to build safety. People are going through really hard times right now. They may not feel that they're in a place to give, and that's okay because you want to emphasize choice and dignity. I'm really glad you shared that with me. I had somebody call me and ask me for money, and I had to tell them that my husband's losing his job. And I would love to help, but I just can't commit to that right now because of this situation. And they were like, I completely understand. Like, I had no idea. And that is totally fine. So in this situation, I was acting out of fear, which is fine. That's the place I was in. Losing a job it was a very scary thing. So just listen for those cues of what they're telling you, because then you can respond appropriately, right? Um, and understanding that you can't wish them into a better place, right? You can't wish them or talk them into feeling more confident. We have to love people for who they are in the moment instead of who we want them to be. Because if you try to move them off of that, they will definitely push back and shut down. Okay, number 2 is anger. This is energy focused on control and blame, right? So in Hawkins' map of consciousness, anger has more energy than fear, but it's still reactive. What this looks like is criticism, distrust, strong opinions, and you cannot argue your way into a yes. You cannot argue your way into a yes. It's the idea here is to acknowledge emotion, restore trust, and invite conversation. What needs to be acknowledged before we can move forward. That is where people are at in art. They may have something happen, maybe like something happened at an event, or they got the wrong thank you or something like that. Anger has more energy than fear, but it's very reactive. So here's what we're going to listen for when we're listening for anger. Okay. We're going to listen for, I don't think nonprofits are efficient, or I'm not sure you're being efficient. Why hasn't this problem been solved yet? A lot of strong opinions, a lot of criticizing. But here's what's truly happening is disappointment, loss of trust, and a desire for control. Anger, disappointment. When somebody says they disappointment, that's unexpressed. That's anger you're afraid to express. And remember, like, anger is an energy, and energy is something that can be received and worked with. I had to really, really work hard over the last few years in my life to reframe my relationship with anger. Because anger is an okay thing to have. I was like, oh, anger is bad, but anger means people care. Anger, when they have strong criticism. I worked with one of my course participants was working with an organization that went through a name change, and people were angry about the name change. It happens all the time. And that is what needs to be acknowledged before they can move forward is that the name change really hurt them. But why did it hurt them? Because it made them feel like they were a loss of control, that maybe the institution that they loved is no longer the same. Change can be hard for people. And her boss at one time said, I'm tired of talking with people about this name change. And I thought, yeah, I'm sure he's tired of it because you have to do it all the time. And also, people are angry because they care, right? And we have to understand that when people are angry, it's because they care. If we didn't care, there would be no reason to be angry, right? So anger, it's okay for folks to be angry. What you don't want to do is defend or argue, right? We don't want to defend or argue. And then we don't want to dismiss their concerns, like deflect, deny, dismiss, or correct them immediately. And we can often want to do this subconsciously because now we're going into a stage of guilt, shame, and fear because we feel this criticism really deeply, right? We feel like, I don't want to feel this. I want this to go away. So I'm going to deflect, dismiss, deny your concerns, right? You're going to bring something to me like, oh, that's not really that big deal, or that was just a little thing. You want to minimize the problem, which will only make it worse. Or just like, oh, that, we changed that already. Like, you want to hear them out because what people in anger want is, right, is to acknowledge their emotion, to invite dialogue, and to offer agency. Like, language that works in this is it sounds like you're really frustrated. You're not wrong to ask that. I would love to hear how, would you like to hear how we're approaching this now? The bottom line here is that anger is often grief in disguise. Meet it with respect, not resistance. Understanding that anger is grief, right? Expressing itself as anger. It is the same thing as the guilt, shame, fear, but it's just coming across as anger. And I know sometimes it's hard to receive anger, and I get it. It's hard to receive anger, but then also it's it's necessary in order to move past, because if you don't address that anger, it's going to be very difficult for you to move past, quite honestly. Okay. Now we're going to shift. Now we're going to shift a little bit. Okay. So we're going to talk about the next phase, which is pride. Yay. Okay. Now, pride is a little bit about an ego, and it's okay to have an ego. It's okay to have an ego. We can all have an ego. Um, and that's all right. That's part of who we are. But pride is energy focuses on identity and superiority. It's the highest level of the lower states, and it's still in defensive mode. It's what we call like a lower order need. So shame, guilt, fear, and and anger are sort of these lower order needs, and so is pride. And it it looks like conditional giving, control, like I know it works. Yes, rooted in ego takes longer and costs more. So because because they have a really high, they have this high ego need cause them to want to have a lot of control of the situation and make things very, very conditional. If you do this for me, I will do that for you. Or here's my long arms in the pot directing you exactly how to spend this money. So your best response is to honor their experience, invite collaboration, and as most as you can, avoid power struggles. Are you trying to win or partner? Because a person in the pride state, it may trigger you so that now we're in a win-lose binary, right? Like if this guy wins, if this woman gets their way, I lose, you know, or if I lose, if I made a thumbs up and they just show it on there, sorry. When I lose, they win. When I win, they lose, right? That's not what we want. We want a partnership. But often, because of pride, we can find ourselves in these places like, oh, I wish they would just do this. Why do they need all this control? So here's what you'll hear. I know it works. I only give to organizations that, right? Or I only give, like their support is very conditional and is very dependent on how they're being treated, right? So they'll give it, but they'll take it away. Okay, what's happening underneath is a desire to feel competent. Their identity is just tied to success or expertise, and they have a fear of losing influence, right? So it's about, when we're in this pride place, what other people think of us is very important. Again, no stage is right or wrong. It's just information. I'm not labeling anyone, just helping understand when we go through. I can be prideful. You can be prideful. We all have a place where we have a lot of pride, where we have a desire to feel competent and our identity is tied to our success or expertise, right? And we have a fear of losing influence. So here's what's not to do, okay? Challenge their identity, right? Or try to educate them or compete for their authority, right? You're like, oh, well, I know best. Let me tell you best. No, I know best. Let me tell you best. That's really not going to help. No, and I feel like you'll know when that's happening, or you can identify when that's happened. If they have an identity that's really wrapped up in certain things, like them being like the head of the committee, or you know somebody, I was working with a board, and one of the board members, like their pride is their ego is really attached to like coming in at the end of the meeting and like and questioning everything, because they're competing for authority. And I know it sucks when people behave that way, but also we can sort of neutralize that and manage that a little more effectively if we understand where it's coming from. So, how to respond: respect their experience, invite collaboration, and honor autonomy. Here's some language that might help you do that, which is you've clearly thought a lot about this. I love your perspective. Here's how we're thinking about it. Tell me what resonates with you. So, no, hey, help me understand that. I'd love to hear more about that. Whatever gets them talking, right? Because they want to be heard ultimately. And then when you hear them, then you can say, here's how we're thinking about it. Hey, I'd love to tell me what resonates. What are you thinking? Pride isn't a problem. It's often a bridge between power and partnership. Okay. Pride, it's not a problem. It's just where people are at, and it can serve as a bridge to then really create a powerful partnership. When you are involved in a power struggle, for something, anything, a donor or whatever it is, especially with a donor, we have to step back and pull back because that is not a partnership, right? And so by pulling back and saying, you've clearly thought a lot about this, it sounds like you have really strong opinions. Help me understand this. Tell me more about it. I'd love to understand your perspective better. This is really important to me that I see it from your side. Would it be possible for you to help me understand? I want to pull back and bring that temperature down for myself, especially because I can't, if I feel like I'm in a power struggle, I want to pull out immediately because it's not going to lead to a yes. And ultimately, this is what we want. Okay. All right. Make sure you ask the question about, am I trying to win or partner? If you're trying to win, pull out, ask the question so you can get to partnership. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. Now we're going to turn this a little bit. Courage. The next one is courage, and courage is the turning point. On this scale, there's a numbers, right? And so I think that shame is the lowest, and it's like at 10. Courage is 200, and it's called the tipping point or the turning point. The courage is where energy shifts from destructive to constructive, and this is the first level of true empowerment. And what this looks like is openness, curiosity, and a willingness to decide. It's when people understand that that their outcomes are their own. Um, okay, I want to pause for just 1 second. In the stage of courage, life becomes feasible and life becomes doable. And I want to hang out here for just 1 second because I think this is so important. And because first of all, this is where clean, aligned, easy yeses happen. They're not going to happen between shame, guilt, fear, anger, and pride. They're not. Okay, you can get them, like maybe, but they're not. But courage, they will. So it's important to understand that, like, what can I do to help people move, right? If you're in fear, if you're in shame, right? How can I help you move up? But I can't always do that because it's probably nothing your organization or cause did that caused this that put them in the emotional state that they're in. But you have to honor the state that they're in. And that and instead of trying to push people around or make people do something they're not in a position to do, hold them, love them, right? Keep them in your orbit, and then and right, because what we're looking for are the people in the courage. So not so much as to like, what can I do to move people up? It's how can I identify and honor where people are? Because just the act of honoring where they are is a service to them. So courage is, like I said, it's where energy shifts from destructive to constructive. It is the tipping point. It is the turning point. This is where you're a clear ask, values-based language, specific invitation. What is the most honest ask I can make right now? That is it. Um, this is your fundraising sweet spot. And in fact, this is the sweet spot for everyone. Even when I'm looking for clients to serve, when I'm looking for people to join my course, when people are encouraged, this is where, because they are open to possibility. They think life is feasible, life is doable. If somebody's coming to me in guilt and fear, of course I can support them, but they're not in a place to be open to change, which is completely okay. I respect that 100%. No amount of me emailing them, cajoling them, reminding them is going to do it. I'll have somebody that's working for an organization that's just really wearing them down, and they get to a new place and it's a whole new thing. And now they're encouraged and they're like, hey, I'm ready to rock. But I'm listening for where they're at and honoring where it is. And I want to say also about our program people. So I was working with an organization and they were giving away free training. Free training. The training is absolutely 100% free to people who are child care professionals who worked in child care centers to get some training so they could advance their career and make more money. People would not take this training. And they're like, this is so crazy. This is free. And I showed them this map and I said, you're coming from courage, where life is feasible and it's full of possibilities. Where do you think these folks are living? Guilt, shame, fear, pride. If you had never been to school or didn't do well in school, and I'm asking you to take a training, that might be start messing with your pride. Okay. If your fear, if the shame, the anger, because you feel like your voice doesn't matter, or all of those things. So we want to meet people where they're at because when we understand them, then they may be more willing, right, to consider another worldview. But what we really wanted to do is look for people who wanted to take this training, who were in courage, right? Who for them, life was a possibility. Sure, they're going to have some concerns and reservations, but for the most part, they're living in courage. So here's what you're going to hear. Tell me more. I'm curious. What would make the biggest difference? These are open um, questions. And the reason that I paused for a second to talk about program people is because a lot of times we may, and I'm not saying you do, but I'm saying there may be judgment towards people who are like, why won't you take advantage of this? Why can't you change your flight? Right? Because they could be like in just a place where they are not ready to see possibility yet. Right? So I just want you to understand that this isn't about labeling. Again, this isn't about diagnosing. It's about understanding where people are at so that you can release your judgment of them as well. And because they are, if you're, if you're feeling shame, your worldview is sort of humiliation. Um, and it's hard to see possibility. And maybe if you're in pride, and you're feeling the ego call, it may not be, it could be where you could maybe slip into courage, but for the most part what you're looking for are the people who are in that place. Okay, because again, it's going to, if you want to hear a yes faster, more frequently, and less follow-up, then we're going to ask where the conversation is the most appropriate and leave the rest. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit more. What's happening underneath in courage? Um, their willingness to engage, their emotional readiness, and the desire for more immediate, meaningful impact. They're there, they're ready, they're in flow mode, they want to go. Okay, what to do? Well, a happy dance. And then be clear and transparent, make a direct values-based ask and invite partnership. This is your sweet spot. This is like, hey, hey, hey. I think one of the things that makes fundraising hard is because we are asking people in pride, anger, fear, guilt. We're making the ask in those stages, and then we're not getting the response we want, and then we're getting the runaround. And so what I'm calling on you to consider is asking less frequently, right? Like not asking everyone, but understanding who is in the best position, because that's when you're going to hear it more frequently with less follow-up. What would you be open to exploring this? Here's what your support could make possible. What feels aligned for you right now? And courage is where ethical, joyful fundraising begins. This is your happy place. You are going to work very hard and not get much money on the people who are in the survival paradigm, right? That are in shame, guilt, fear, anger, and pride. And that's okay. So now you know. Now you know why it's not working. It's not you. It's not your ask. It's not, it's not how many times you email or where your donate button is on the web page. It really is understanding where people are at. Remember, you don't get to say who or when. That's the universe's job. But you can really listen and respond because, and here's one more thing I want to say is that people aren't going to be in these stages forever. My husband already got a new job. I called that person back and I'm giving them money. So it's not that, but they will remember you and you will have a relationship with them when and if are get into courage. But if you push them away, right, and you ask when they're not ready, or you try to convince them or control them, you're going to have a break that you may not be able to repair. So understanding that a lot of what you're doing is, remember, relationship first, money will follow. This is what relationship looks like. Meeting the needs of somebody that's in fear, shame, grief. I had somebody that we are working on maybe forming a collaboration. I love this person. I'm so excited. She's so fascinating and interesting to me. And she had to cancel, because her father passed away in the middle of the night. She's in a lot of grief. She's probably, and I said, okay, she may not be ready to make these decisions, and maybe not for a little while. And if I try to push her to move something forward before she's not ready, we're going to break, right? There could be a break. I'm not saying there will be, but there could be. So I'm going to be listening for her cues to tell me when she's ready. Just letting her know, hey, I'm here. When you're ready to talk again, I'm here. So what is really going to help you hear yes faster, more frequently, and with less follow-up is by asking if people are encouraged or above. Speaking of above, let's go into our next one, which is willingness and acceptance. Now we're getting into this very higher order needs. And man, you know these people, and I know you love these people. Okay. So the next one is willingness and acceptance. Hold on. Let me get my notes. So David Hawkins' view of this is there's less resistance and more collaboration. And what this looks like is trust, long-term thinking. Clarity speeds yes more than persuasion. Your best response is transparency, directness, and gratitude without pressure. You're thinking like, where can I simplify? People in willingness and acceptance have a high level of trust and acceptance and optimism. This isn't rainbows or butterflies. I'm not saying that, they're la la la, but they have a high level of trust and acceptance. Oh, their view of the world is harmonious and hopeful, and their view of self is inspiring and merciful. When you are in willingness and acceptance, like you're in the flow. And again, it's a really deep level of trust with the people around you. And I think you can think about the collaborators that you have and be like, yep, willingness, acceptance. Yep, because they are beautiful to work with. Beautiful. Um, Even more than courage. Like what you'll hear is, I trust your leadership. How can I help? What do you need most? What's happening underneath is shared values, right? A reduced need for control and long-term thinking. A high level of trust, a very lack of need for control, and a really an emphasis and a understanding of shared value. So what are you going to do? You're going to offer clarity, not pressure, share honest needs, and deepen the relationship. Language that you might use is, here's where your support would be most helpful. Thank you for trusting us. What would you like to be more involved? What would that look like for you to be more involved? At this level, donors don't want convincing, they want clarity, right? They want clarity. They have trust, right? They get it. They get it all. They just may want like a higher level of clarity. These are the folks that are like your best people who are always wanting to learn more, wanting to be involved more. They don't, they trust you deeply and they want clarity. All right. Now, our final stage is love. Um, and love is service, unity, generosity without attachment. Hold on. I messed up my notes. Okay. Ah, here it is. Okay. Service and unity. David Hawkins describes this as motivation shifts from self to service, right? What this looks like is giving beyond money, advocacy and loyalty. They're your best friends. And yes becomes an ongoing partnership. These are your true partners and collaborators. They don't need much and they give a lot because they are coming from a place of service. They may not, need their name on the wall. And if people want their name on the wall, that's fine. That's good. But understand that may be coming from a place of pride, right? But So just understand the intention behind some of those needs. But they give beyond money, the advocacy and loyalty, and yes, is an ongoing partnership. Your best response is shared leadership, collective impact, and stewardship without attachment. How do I honor this without centering the gift? Right? How do I honor this person in this relationship without centering the gift? And that is partnership, that is advocacy, um, and all of those things show me that this is the highest order, where it's not about giving, it's about belonging, it's about your organization is a part of their identity and a part of their, a part of who they are. So let me talk about this for a little bit so you can hear it, okay? What you'll hear is, I just want to help. This matters to me. And giving beyond money, advocacy, connections, they're just your biggest, best cheerleader. They're always sharing your stuff. They're always telling people about you. They're always introducing new people to you. Just when you're with them, they are feeling like you feel so connected to them and so comfortable. Um, so what's happening underneath? Shared sense of humanity and desire to serve something bigger than self. And I think that's where um, even when encourage that love is, because it is a desire to serve something bigger than myself, right? And even beyond willingness and acceptance is, this is bigger than me. So what to do is stay grounded, avoid pedestal placing. That is not where they want to be, and honor contribution without dependency. So you want to honor the contribution, but but you don't have to depend. You're not putting anything onto that contribution, right? You're just going to honor the contribution for what it is. And avoid pedestal placing. Please don't put these people on a pedestal. And because we love them so much and we want to thank them. But remember, love comes from selflessness, from a desire to help as something greater than themselves. So the way you can honor them is just doing your work, right? Doing your best work, because that's what they truly want. Um, your presence, what language that works is, your presence makes a real difference. We're grateful to walk alongside you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Here's the bottom line here. Love doesn't need a pitch, it needs a pathway. So remember that love, this stage is about service and giving them a pathway and opportunities to share that love, whether it's advocacy, whether it's leading groups, whether it's sharing their love of the organization with other people. That's a great spot for them to be in. You're finding a pathway, and what, thank you for being a part. We're grateful alongside of you. And please, let's try not to so why follow-up fails? Well, let's talk about why your follow-up fails through the lens of the David Hawkins map of consciousness. Follow-up fails when we keep asking instead of listening. No amount of follow-up moves someone into courage. It just doesn't. And no amount of follow-up is going to make somebody ready to give, despite our belief that it does. But presence and responsiveness do, right? You can't follow up your way up the ladder of consciousness. You can't, but presence and responsiveness do. This framework isn't about compassion. This framework is about compassion, not control, not persuasion, not pressure. So we don't move donors up the map. We walk with them. Okay. You can't move them, but you can walk with them. And you can let them know that when they are ready, you are there. But follow-up fails because keep asking instead of listening. That we want to push somebody, hey, just want to remind you, blah, blah, blah. Instead of listening and really listening to where people are at, because they just may not be in a place, an emotional state of that courage, where that's where fundraising starts. That's when the giving starts, because that's when they can see, a life of possibility. And if they can see it in themselves, they can see it in you. So courage, willingness, and acceptance and love are those stages where that's your fundraising people. That's where 80% of your, I'm going to use the 80-20 rule, probably 80% of your money comes from. And if we focus on those folks, it's going to come easier, right? Faster, more frequently with less follow-up. My invitation to you, as it always is hear yes faster, because you are misaligned asks, right? They're here, you're two ships in it, right? You're having more honest conversations, and their generosity becomes more sustainable. Because when they go into grief, when they go into apathy, there's crazy times that happen. There's crazy times that have been happening. There are crazy times that will be happening. They may be not in a place where they can register this. That's okay. That's okay. You get it, right? And now you have the words to use to help them through that and to let them know that you understand where they're at. So your goal here is, remember, relationship first, money will follow. And what this looks like is helping you understand where you're at in the relationship. And the reason people aren't saying yes isn't because you didn't ask enough, you didn't pitch it right, whatever. The reason is most likely is because they weren't in a state of consciousness that allowed them to be giving, that they weren't in that courage yet. I think sometimes you can eke out a few gifts from the pride folks, but I think it takes a lot of energy. I don't think anybody, not anybody, because I don't want to say an absolute, but generally, I don't think people in anger, fear, grief, shame are potential donors at this time. Remember, we all go up and down these all the time, right? So at that time. So you just want to be an empathetic relationship so that when they do come to courage, like I gave you the example of me, right? Hey, things got better. I can give that gift now. You caught me at an odd time. Things were tough. Things are better. So people, we move through this all the time. Remember, there's no state that's better than the other. We don't not judging or labeling people. We're just understanding where they're at and what's going on underneath it so we can respond appropriately. Because when we respond in a way that meets their needs, they will stay around and they will feel loved and respected, and they will be more likely to stay. And when they do, right, think of come to consciousness, when they do come to courage, and they hit that place where they can see the possibility of the world again, you're there. You're there. And isn't that a beautiful thing? So when you ask, at the level of courage and above, a yes doesn't need chasing, right? So that's why you're chasing so much. That's why there's so many follow-ups. That's why you have these conversations and nothing happens, because people are in these lower states. But when you connect with somebody who's encouraged, when you know it, okay, here's my invitation to move this relationship forward. I loved putting this content together for you. I have worked with this map of consciousness for years. It really changed how I saw the world and how I related to people. And it made me a much more empathetic, loving, and forgiving person, because I could understand, oh, they're in fear or grief or anger, and not to like be so reactive or judgmental of that, but just understand that's just a place that's just the conscious state they're in right now, and I don't have to like judge them for it or wish it was different. It just is the way it is. And so this in any part of your life can make you much more empathetic and understanding and a much better listener and communicator. David Hawkins' books, Letting Go, Power versus Force, they are big chunky reads, okay? But they are very, very good and really, really eye-opening. If you want to dig deeper into his work, I would recommend it. His book, Letting Go, each chapter is one stage of the consciousness. Now, I took this map of consciousness, I broke it down and simplified it quite a bit, because there's a few more in there, but I just making this easy for you to understand, especially in terms of fundraising. So go out there, be conscious, listen, meet people's needs where they're at, and understand when an aligned ask can be made and when it's okay to let it go for now. If you want to learn how to be a master of influence and communication and get to yes faster, more easily, more frequently with less follow-up. I can totally teach you how to do that. I've coached and trained hundreds and hundreds of people in this system, and I can do it for you too. There's always, my link is in the show notes. Please feel free to reach out, schedule a time to talk, see if you're ready for the work. If you're feeling, if you're feeling courageous, if you're feeling the possibility of the world, I'm ready to go. Reach out, let's talk, and we'll talk about how I work and if it's a fit for you. And we'll see you next time on the Influential Nonprofit.